In a sweltering Atlanta courtroom, Marcus Tate, clad in a threadbare jacket, faces a trumped-up theft charge. Judge Harlan Prescott, his face twisted with scorn, hurls vicious racial slurs, branding Marcus a menace before a hushed crowd. The room expects Marcus to crumble, but he stands unshaken, eyes sharp with purpose. Unknown to all, he's a U.S. Marshal, undercover to dismantle Prescott's corrupt empire. As the gavel slams, jailing him, Marcus flashes a defiant smirk, hinting at a bold plan. What's his next move? Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from. If you stand for justice, hit like and subscribe, because tomorrow's episode will blow you away. Marcus Tate sat on the cold steel bench of an Atlanta holding cell, the stench of sweat and despair thick in the air, his worn jacket still clinging to his shoulders after Judge Harlan Prescott's courtroom tirade. The fluorescent lights buzzed. Overhead, casting harsh shadows on the graffiti-scarred walls, where names and curses were scratched into the paint by countless others who'd been chewed up by the system. His wrists ached from the cuffs they'd slapped on him, too tight, deliberately so, but Marcus kept his breathing steady, his mind razor-sharp. He wasn't just another black man caught in the gears of Prescott's corrupt judicial machine. He was a U.S. Marshal, 35 years old with a mission carved into his soul. Expose the judge's role in a network that railroaded black men into prison with false charges, stripping them of their lives for profit and power. Every second in this cell was a step toward dismantling that empire, and Marcus was playing a dangerous game to make it happen. His eyes flicked to the corner of the cell, where a tiny camera, no bigger than a pinhead, was hidden in the seam of his jacket, recording every move. He'd planted it before stepping into the courtroom, knowing Prescott's system thrived on unchecked brutality. Now he needed to provoke that brutality into the open, to capture the raw truth that would spark a fire. The cell block door clanged, and two guards swaggered in, their boots thudding against the concrete floor. The taller one, a barrel-chested man with a buzz cut and a sneer, clutched a baton, tapping it against his palm like he was itching to use it. His name tag read Carver. The other, shorter but wiry, had a face like a weasel, eyes glinting with malice. "Tate," Carver barked, his voice dripping with contempt. "You think you're tough, mouthing off in Prescott's court? Time to learn your place." Marcus leaned back against the wall, his posture relaxed but his muscles coiled, ready. He knew their type, emboldened by the judge's influence, drunk on the power to punish without consequence. "I didn't mouth off," Marcus said, his tone calm but edged with defiance. "Your boss just doesn't like black folks breathing his air." Carver's face reddened, and the weasel-faced guard snorted, stepping closer. "Keep talking, boy," Carver growled, raising the baton. Marcus's heart pounded, but he held their gaze, goading them. "What's the matter? Prescott tell you to shut me up before I embarrass him again?" That did it. Carver lunged, slamming the baton toward Marcus's ribs, while the other guard grabbed his arms, pinning him against the wall. Pain exploded in Marcus's side, but he twisted just enough to take the blow on his shoulder, keeping his jacket's camera clear. The lens was capturing every second of their rage, every slur they spat as they beat him, thinking they were breaking him. Marcus gritted his teeth, letting the blows land, his body absorbing the punishment while his mind stayed focused. He needed enough footage to damn them, to show the world what Prescott's system did to men like him. After a minute, when Carver's arm tired and the weasel-faced guard stepped back, panting, Marcus slumped to the floor, faking weakness. "Stay down," Carver snarled, spitting on the concrete near Marcus's face. They left, slamming the door, their laughter echoing down the hall. Marcus waited, counting to 10, then pulled a tiny device from his sleeve, a transmitter synced to the camera. He pressed a button, sending the footage to a secure server operated by his Marshal contact, Lena Carter, stationed outside Atlanta. Within hours, the video hit the internet, uploaded anonymously to platforms where it couldn't be scrubbed. The clip spread like wildfire, showing the guards' unprovoked attack, their racial slurs ringing clear, and Marcus's face, bruised but unbowed, staring into the lens as if daring the world to act. By morning, the video had millions of views, hashtags like "Justice for Tate" trending across social media, and news outlets picking up the story. Protesters gathered outside the courthouse, chanting for Prescott's resignation, their signs demanding an end to systemic abuse. Marcus, still locked in his cell, heard the commotion through a barred window, a faint smile crossing his lips. He'd struck the first blow, and it felt like a win. The public was awake, and Prescott's name was in the mud. For a moment, Marcus allowed himself to hope he'd cracked the judge's armor, but Prescott wasn't a man who bent under pressure. In his oak-paneled office, the judge sat behind a massive desk, his face a mask of cold fury as he watched the viral video on a tablet. His allies, a network of cops, politicians, and media moguls, were already circling the wagons. Prescott hadn't clawed his way to power by letting troublemakers like Marcus Tate outmaneuver him. He'd built his empire on fear, and he wasn't about to let a single video undo it. By noon, he'd convened a closed-door meeting with the sheriff and a local news editor loyal to his cause. "This Tate character thinks he's clever," Prescott said, his voice low and venomous. "We bury him." Within hours, the narrative shifted. A new video surfaced, doctored by Prescott's team, showing Marcus allegedly attacking the guards first, edited to make him look like a violent predator. The sheriff's department released a statement, backed by witnesses, claiming Marcus had instigated a brawl, injuring Carver and his partner. The charges against Marcus escalated from petty theft to felony assault, carrying a 7-year sentence. Prescott's media allies ran the story hard, plastering Marcus's mugshot across every channel, labeling him a dangerous thug who'd manipulated the public with a staged video. Commentators, paid to stoke fear, warned of urban chaos if men like Marcus weren't locked away. The protests outside the courthouse dwindled as public opinion fractured, some now believing Marcus was the villain Prescott painted him to be. Marcus, still in his cell, caught the news on a contraband phone slipped to him by a sympathetic inmate. His stomach twisted as he watched the doctored video, his face distorted into a snarl that wasn't his. The hashtags had shifted, "Lock Up Tate" gaining traction among Prescott's supporters. His bruises throbbed, a reminder of the real beating he'd taken, but the pain in his chest was worse. He'd thought the truth would be enough, that the world would see through Prescott's lies. Instead, the judge had turned his own weapon against him, twisting the narrative with a speed and ruthlessness that left Marcus reeling. The cell felt smaller now, the walls closing in as he realized the depth of Prescott's power. This wasn't just a corrupt judge. It was a machine oiled by money and influence, designed to crush anyone who dared challenge it. Marcus's mission hadn't just gotten harder. It had become a fight for survival. He tucked the phone away, his jaw tight, and stared at the ceiling, replaying every move he'd made. The footage was supposed to be his ace, but Prescott had trumped it, and now Marcus was facing years behind bars, his identity as a marshal still hidden, his resources dwindling. He needed a new plan, and fast, because Prescott wasn't done. The judge's next move would be worse, and Marcus could feel it coming like a storm. Marcus Tate paced the cramped holding cell, the concrete floor cold beneath his worn sneakers, his mind racing as the weight of Judge Harlan Prescott's counterattack pressed down on him. The doctored video branding him a violent thug looped endlessly on the news, eroding the public's outrage over his beating, and the felony assault charge now hung over him like a guillotine. His ribs still ached from the guards' batons, but the sting of betrayal cut deeper. He'd leaked the truth, exposed the system's brutality, only for Prescott to twist it, painting Marcus as the villain in a city already primed to believe the worst about a black man. The cell's bars seemed to mock him, a reminder of how far he'd fallen from his mission as a U.S. Marshal to dismantle Prescott's corrupt network. But Marcus wasn't done. He'd faced worse odds in his 15 years on the force, from undercover ops in drug dens to busting cartel safehouses. This was just another battlefield, and he'd fight with every ounce of cunning he had. A faint clatter echoed down the hall, and Marcus tensed, his eyes narrowing as a new figure approached, her heels clicking with purpose. Clara Evans, a public defender with a reputation for taking on hopeless cases, stepped into view, her sharp brown eyes scanning him through the bars. She was black, mid-40s, with a no-nonsense air and a briefcase stuffed with files. "Marcus?" "Tate," she said, her voice low but firm. "I'm your lawyer and I'm here to get you out." Marcus studied her, wary but intrigued. Could she be the ally he needed, or was this another of Prescott's traps? Clara wasted no time, sliding a tablet through the bars, its screen glowing with court documents. "I've seen the video, the real one," she whispered, glancing over her shoulder. "Prescott's running a machine, rigging trials to lock up black men for profit. I've got evidence, bank records tying him to private prisons." Marcus's pulse quickened as he scrolled through the files, his martial instincts kicking in. The records showed payments from Prescott's accounts to shell companies linked to detention centers, each coinciding with a string of convictions against black defendants. It was a gold mine, enough to blow the judge's operation wide open. Clara leaned closer, her voice urgent. "I'm filing a motion to dismiss your charges, citing judicial misconduct. If we move fast, we can get you in front of a different judge." Marcus nodded, hope flickering for the first time since the cell door slammed shut. Clara's plan was bold, a direct shot at Prescott's throne, and Marcus felt the tide turning. They spent hours strategizing, mapping out every angle, from witness testimonies to media leaks. By dawn, Clara filed the motion, and whispers of Prescott's corruption began spreading through legal circles. Marcus sat back in his cell, a grim smile tugging at his lips. He'd been a step behind, but Clara's evidence was his lifeline, a chance to flip the script and put Prescott on the defensive. Was this the break he'd been waiting for, the moment to strike back? The next day, the courthouse buzzed with tension as Clara presented her motion, her voice steady as she laid out Prescott's financial ties. Reporters scribbled furiously, and activists live-streamed the hearing, the room electric with anticipation. Marcus, shackled but composed, watched from the defendant's table, his heart pounding. The motion was gaining traction, and for a fleeting moment, he believed they'd cracked Prescott's armor, but Prescott wasn't a man who played fair. That night, as Clara drove home through Atlanta's rain-slicked streets, a black SUV roared up behind her, its headlights blinding in her rear view mirror. Two masked men leapt out, shattering her car window and dragging her into an alley. They didn't speak, didn't need to. Their fists and boots did the talking, leaving Clara bloodied on the pavement, her briefcase torched, the evidence reduced to ash. The attackers vanished, but their message was clear. Prescott's reach was long and defiance came at a price. Worse followed. By morning, a new video hit the airwaves, grainy but damning, showing Clara allegedly accepting a cash bribe. In a parking lot. The footage was a lie, expertly forged by Prescott's allies, but it spread like poison, branding Clara a corrupt lawyer out to free a dangerous criminal. Her license was suspended, her reputation shredded, and her family received death threats, forcing her to flee the city. Marcus, back in his cell, caught the news on a guard's radio, his fists clenching until his knuckles whitened. Clara had been his shot, his ally, and Prescott had crushed her without blinking. The courtroom was colder now, the air thick with defeat, as Marcus faced Prescott's gavel alone. The judge's eyes gleamed with triumph, his voice dripping with false pity as he denied the motion, citing insufficient evidence and Clara's disgraceful conduct. Marcus's felony charge stood, and the trial date loomed, promising a conviction under Prescott's thumb. The public, swayed by the smear campaign, turned on Clara, and Marcus's name faded from the protests, replaced by calls to clean up the streets. He sat in the dark, the cell's silence deafening, his mind replaying Clara's words about the evidence, now gone. Prescott hadn't just outmaneuvered him, he'd obliterated his support, leaving Marcus to face a rigged system with no lawyer, no proof, and no hope of a fair fight. The judge's machine was relentless, its gears grinding down anyone who dared resist. Marcus's mission felt like a distant dream, his identity as a marshal a secret he couldn't yet reveal without risking everything. But surrender wasn't in his blood. He'd lost Clara, lost the evidence, but he still had his training, his will, and a burning need to make Prescott pay. How could he fight back now, with the walls closing in? Comment 1 if you're raging. Throughout Prescott's dirty tactics, Hit like if you're rooting for Marcus to turn this around, and subscribe for the next chapter of this battle for justice. Will Marcus find a way to expose the judge, or is Prescott's grip too tight? What's his next move when every door seems slammed shut? Marcus Tate stood in the Atlanta courtroom, shackles biting into his wrists, the air heavy with the scent of polished wood and stale coffee as Judge Harlan Prescott loomed over the bench, his eyes glinting with predatory glee. The felony assault, charge fabricated to bury Marcus after his viral video exposed the guard's brutality, now anchored him to this rigged trial, with no lawyer and no evidence since Clara Evans's downfall. The jury, a mix of skeptical faces and Prescott's planted allies, watched Marcus like he was already guilty, their biases fed by the media's portrayal of him as a violent thug. But Marcus, a U.S. Marshal undercover, hadn't survived years of high-stakes missions by crumbling under pressure. His mission to dismantle Prescott's corrupt network, which profited from jailing black men, burned brighter than ever, even as the odds stacked against him. He'd lost Clara, lost the bank records, but his training kept him sharp, his mind a steel trap plotting every move. Today, he'd turn the courtroom into his battlefield, using Prescott's own arrogance against him. As the trial began, Marcus locked eyes with the judge, his expression calm but defiant, a silent promise that this wasn't over. Could he outsmart a system designed to crush him, or was this the end of his fight? Prescott called the court to order, his voice smooth but laced with venom, framing Marcus's case as a clear threat to public safety. The prosecutor, a slick attorney named Victor Hayes, spun a tale of Marcus as a career criminal who'd attacked noble guards waving the doctored video like a trophy. Marcus, representing himself, stood to cross-examine, his voice steady as he questioned Hayes's witnesses, 2 cops who'd seen the assault. He leaned into his Marshal interrogation skills, catching them in contradictions, their stories unraveling under his precise, relentless probing. "So, Officer Grant," Marcus said, pacing slightly, "you saw me swing first, but the cell's camera, which mysteriously malfunctioned, didn't. Convenient." The jury shifted, some frowning, others whispering. Marcus pressed harder, baiting Prescott to react, knowing the judge's temper was his weakness. When Hayes objected, Prescott snapped, "Enough of this circus, Tate, you're wasting our time." The outburst, laced with a racial slur under his breath, hung in the air, audible to the front row. Marcus seized the moment, turning to the jury. "That's the man deciding my fate, you heard him. Is this justice?" The room buzzed, tension crackling like static, and Marcus felt the tide shift. He was exposing Prescott's bias, planting doubt in the jury's minds, and it felt like a spark catching fire. The trial stretched into the afternoon, Marcus weaving a narrative of systemic abuse, his words measured but searing, drawing on his own beating and Clara's destruction. A juror, a young woman with a notepad, scribbled furiously, her eyes locked on Marcus, and he sensed an ally. By day's end, she slipped a note to a bailiff, who passed it to a local activist group outside. The note quoted Prescott's slur, and within hours it hit social media, igniting a firestorm. Protesters swarmed the courthouse steps, their chants of "No justice, no peace" echoing through the windows, signs demanding Prescott's removal. News vans parked across the street, cameras rolling as anchors debated the judge's conduct. Marcus, back in his cell, heard the commotion through a cracked window, his heart racing. The juror's leak was a lifeline, proof his courtroom gambit had worked. The public was rallying again, and Prescott's grip was slipping. For the first time in days, Marcus allowed himself a flicker of hope, believing he'd turned the trial into a weapon against the judge. Had he finally cracked the system's facade, or was this just a fleeting victory? But Prescott was a master of control, his empire built on bending the world to his will. As protests grew, he sat in his chambers, his face a mask of cold calculation, sipping bourbon while his allies plotted. The juror's leak was a problem, but Prescott thrived on chaos, turning threats into opportunities. He summoned Hayes and the sheriff, his voice low and commanding. "This ends now." By morning, Prescott declared a mistrial, citing public unrest that compromised the proceedings. The courtroom gasped as he slammed the gavel, his eyes boring into Marcus. "Defendant will be held without bail pending retrial," he added, his tone final. Marcus's stomach dropped, the hope he'd clung to evaporating. Worse came next. Prescott ordered his transfer to Fulton County's notorious ironclad prison, a hellhole known for its brutal treatment of black inmates, where guards operated like a gang and accidents were common. The sheriff, a Prescotty crony, smirked as he cuffed Marcus, whispering, "Ironclad's gonna break you, boy." The transfer papers, stamped with Prescott's signature, felt like a death sentence. Marcus's courtroom victory had backfired. His exposure of Prescott's bias twisted into a trap that sent him to a place where survival was a daily gamble. As deputies dragged Marcus to a transport van, the protesters' chants faded. Their signs no match for Prescott's power. Ironclad's reputation loomed in Marcus's mind, stories of inmates beaten, starved, or worse, all under the guise of discipline. He knew Prescott's allies ran the prison, and they'd been given orders to make him suffer. The van's engine roared, and Marcus sat in the dark, his shackles clanking, his mind racing for a plan. His Marshal identity was still hidden, a card he couldn't play yet, but Ironclad would test every skill he had. Prescott had outplayed him again, turning a public win into a private nightmare, and the judge's machine seemed unstoppable. Marcus's mission, his fight for justice, hung by a thread, and Ironclad was no ordinary prison. It was a crucible meant to destroy him. What could he do in a place where the system itself was the enemy, and how would he survive the judge's next move? Marcus Tate jolted awake in the back of a rattling prison van, his shackles clanking as the vehicle lurched toward Ironclad Prison, a fortress of despair carved into the Georgia countryside, its reputation for breaking black inmates a grim legend among those who knew its name. The air inside the van was thick with the sour tang of sweat and metal, and Marcus's ribs throbbed from the guard's earlier beating, a parting gift from Judge Harlan Prescott's cronies. The mistrial had been a gut punch, his courtroom defiance twisted into a one-way ticket to this hellhole, where Prescott's influence ensured accidents for troublemakers like him. Marcus, a U.S. Marshal undercover, clung to his mission. Expose the judge's network that profited from caging black men. Ironclad was no mere setback. It was a death trap, its guards and inmates primed to make him pay for humiliating Prescott. As the van's tires crunched gravel, Marcus's eyes scanned the darkness, his mind racing. His training had prepared him for hostile environments, but this was a war zone where the system itself was the enemy. Could he turn this prison into a stage for his fight, or would it become his grave? Ironclad's gates loomed, iron jaws swallowing. The van as it rolled into a courtyard, lit by floodlights that burned like cruel suns. Guards hauled Marcus out, their grips bruising, their faces masks of contempt. The intake process was a ritual of degradation, strip search, barked orders, and a shower that sprayed icy water, all designed to strip away dignity. Marcus endured, his jaw tight, memorizing every detail, every guard's name, every camera's blind spot. His cell, a 6x8 concrete box, reeked of mildew, its walls scarred with desperate scratches. The first night, a guard named Voss, a hulking figure with a shaved head and a swastika tattoo peeking from his sleeve, stopped by, twirling a baton. "Prescott says hi," Voss sneered, his voice low. "You won't last a week." Marcus met, his gaze unblinking. "We'll see who breaks first." Voss laughed, but Marcus saw the flicker of unease in his eyes. The guard's threat was real, but Marcus wasn't here to be a victim. He needed allies, a plan, and a way to turn Ironclad's chaos to his advantage. Was there a crack in this prison's armor he could exploit? Days bled into nights, each marked by calculated harassment. Guards forgot Marcus's meals, leaving him with stale bread or nothing. In the yard, inmates loyal to Voss, a mix of white supremacists and hired muscle, shadowed him, their taunts laced with racial slurs, their fists itching for a fight. Marcus, lean but wiry from years of training, kept his distance, observing. He noticed others, black inmates who moved with quiet defiance, their eyes meeting his in fleeting moments of understanding. One, a wiry man named Jamal, approached during a rare moment alone, his voice a whisper. Heard you stood up to Prescott, respect, but Voss runs this place for him. You're marked. Marcus nodded, sensing an opening. Over weeks he built trust, sharing stories of his arrest, keeping his Marshal identity hidden. Jamal introduced him to a small crew, men who'd been railroaded by Prescott's courts, their lives stolen for minor or fabricated crimes. Together they hatched a plan, stage a breakout not to escape, but to expose Ironclad's abuses. Marcus proposed smuggling a phone to record the guards' brutality, then leaking it to the outside world, reigniting the public's fury. The crew agreed, their hope fragile but fierce. Could this alliance be the key to turning the tables? The plan took shape, Marcus using his covert skills to map the prison's routines, identifying a supply truck that left weekly, its driver bribbable. Jamal secured a burner phone from a kitchen worker, and Marcus rigged it to record during a staged fight in the mess hall. The day came, tension thick as the crew gathered, their eyes locked on Marcus. He nodded, and chaos erupted, inmates shoving tables, yelling, while Marcus took a calculated punch from an ally, drawing Voss and his guards. The phone, hidden in a vent, captured everything. Voss's baton cracking skulls, his slurs ringing. Out, his men targeting black inmates with savage precision. Marcus, bruised but alert, slipped the phone to Jamal, who passed it to the truck driver. By nightfall, the footage was out, uploaded to activist networks, showing Ironclad's horrors in stark detail. Social media exploded, the Ironclad exposed trending, with protests flaring outside the prison's gates. Marcus, back in his cell, heard the distant chants, his chest tight with hope. The world was watching again, and Prescott's name was tied to this nightmare. Had Marcus finally landed a blow the judge couldn't dodge, but Prescott's machine was relentless, its gears grinding even in crisis. Voss, tipped off by a mole among the inmates, stormed the cell block hours later, his face a mask of rage. "You think you're slick, Tate?" he roared, slamming Marcus against the wall. The prison went into lockdown, sirens blaring, as guards tore through cells, seizing the burner phone's hiding spot. Prescott, from his office, orchestrated the response, his voice calm over the phone to the warden. "Make it a riot. Pin it on Tate." By morning, the news spun a new lie. Marcus had led a violent uprising, injuring guards and inciting chaos. The riot became Prescott's excuse to push for Marcus's transfer to a Supermax facility in Colorado, a black site where inmates vanished, their stories silenced forever. The transfer order came swiftly, stamped with Prescott's influence, and Marcus was dragged to a holding area, his wrists cuffed, his crew scattered or beaten. The footage, his hard-won victory, was buried under the riot narrative, and the protests fizzled as public fear took hold. Marcus's heart sank, the cell's walls closing in tighter than ever. He'd rallied the world, only for Prescott to snuff it out, his power suffocating the truth. Ironclad hadn't broken him, but Supermax might. Comment 1 if you're furious at Prescott's lies, hit like if you believe Marcus can still fight back, and subscribe to see how this battle unfolds. With no allies left and a transfer looming, what can Marcus do to claw his way out of this trap? Marcus Tate sat shackled in the back of a prison transport van, the hum of the engine vibrating through the steel bench, his body bruised from Ironclad Prison's relentless gauntlet, his mind a storm of strategy and survival. The transfer to a Colorado Supermax, ordered by Judge Harlan Prescott, was a death sentence dressed in paperwork, a move to bury Marcus where no one would hear his story. Ironclad's riot lie, spun to crush his leaked footage of guard brutality, had snuffed out the protests, leaving Marcus isolated, his mission to expose Prescott's corrupt network teetering on collapse. But Marcus, a U.S. Marshal undercover, wasn't built to break. His 15 years of covert ops had taught him to turn traps into opportunities, and this van, rattling down a rural Georgia highway, was his chance. The guards up front, a pair of Prescott's lackeys, laughed over the radio, oblivious to the storm brewing behind them. Marcus's eyes darted to the cuffs, his fingers testing the lock, his martial training kicking in. He had one shot to escape, to keep his fight alive. But the cost would be steep. Could he outwit the system again, or was this road the end of his war? The van hit a pothole, jostling Marcus, and he seized the moment, slipping a hidden pin from his sleeve, a trick he'd learned in training for just such a moment. His fingers worked fast, the cuffs clicking open with a soft snap, his movements masked by the engine's drone. The guards, distracted by a country song blaring through the speakers, didn't notice. Marcus scanned the van's interior, spotting a loose panel near the door, likely a maintenance hatch. He waited, counting miles, until the van slowed at a bend, the driver cursing at a deer in the road. Marcus lunged, prying the panel free, his heart pounding as he squeezed through the narrow gap, tumbling onto the asphalt as the van roared on. Pain shot through his shoulder, the pavement scraping his skin, but he rolled into a ditch hidden by tall grass. The van's taillights vanished, and Marcus lay still, catching his breath, the night air cool against his sweat-soaked face. He was free, but freedom was a lie when Prescott's machine hunted him. He needed help, and fast. His only hope was Lena Carter, his Marshal colleague stationed 60 miles away in Macon, the one person he trusted to back him up. Could she get him the evidence to bury Prescott, or was he walking into another trap? Marcus trekked through the woods, sticking to shadows, his body aching but his mind razor-sharp. By dawn he reached a gas station, its neon sign flickering in the mist. Using a stolen burner phone from a trucker's unlocked cab, he called Lena, his voice low. "It's me, I'm out but I need you. Prescott's got me marked for Supermax." Lena's voice crackled through the line, tense but steady. "I've got something, Marcus. Files, emails linking Prescott to a white supremacist group funding his operation. Meet me at the old mill 20 miles east, I'll bring them." Marcus's chest tightened with hope. The first real lead since Clara's evidence burned. He hitched a ride with a farmer, keeping his face hidden, and reached the mill by noon, its rusted skeleton looming over a dry riverbed. Lena was there, her SUV parked in the shade, her eyes scanning the horizon. She handed him a flash drive, her hands trembling. "This is it, Marcus. Names, dates, transfers. Enough to end him." Marcus gripped the drive, relief flooding him. With these files he could expose Prescott's network, rally the public, and turn the hunter into the hunted. For a moment, he believed he'd clawed his way back, that this was the turning point to bring the judge down. But Prescott's shadow was never far. As Marcus pocketed the drive, a low rumble broke the silence, and 3 black SUVs screeched into the clearing, dust billowing like a storm. Armed mercenaries in tactical gear spilled out, their rifles trained on Marcus and Lena, their leader, barking orders through a headset. Marcus's stomach dropped, his eyes flicking to Lena, whose face was pale, her hands raised. "I'm sorry," she whispered, tears in her eyes. "They got to my family, Marcus. They said they'd kill them." The betrayal hit like a blade, sharper than any blow in Ironclad. Lena, his last ally, had been coerced, her loyalty broken by Prescott's threats. The mercenaries advanced, their leader, a scarred man with cold eyes, snatching the flash drive and smashing it under his boot. "Prescott sends his regards," he said, his voice flat. Marcus lunged, tackling the man, but a rifle butt cracked against his skull, stars exploding in his vision. The mercenaries dragged Lena away, her screams fading, and turned on Marcus, their fists and boots raining down. They didn't kill him, not yet. Instead, they left him bloodied in the dirt, his body broken, the evidence destroyed. "You're done, Tate," the leader spat, tossing a burner phone beside him. Next. Time we don't stop. The SUVs roared off, leaving Marcus alone, the mill's silence mocking his defeat. Marcus lay in the ditch, pain searing through every muscle, the taste of blood thick in his mouth. The flash drive, his lifeline, was gone, crushed like his hope. Lena's betrayal stung worse than the blows, a reminder of Prescott's reach, his ability to twist even the strongest bonds. The burner phone buzzed, and Marcus, groaning, flipped it open. A text from an unknown number. "Run, Tate. Nowhere's safe." Prescott was toying with him, savoring the hunt. Marcus's mission, his fight to expose the judge's network, felt like a fading ember, smothered by a system that turned allies into enemies and truth into lies. Ironclad had been a crucible, but this ambush was a message. Prescott could strike anywhere, any time. Marcus staggered to his feet, his vision blurry, his resolve battered but unbroken. He was a marshal, trained to survive, to fight against impossible odds. The road ahead was darker than ever, but he'd find a way even if it meant clawing through hell itself. What could he do now, with no evidence, no allies, and Prescott's mercenaries closing in? Marcus Tate stumbled through the Georgia woods, his body a map of bruises from the mercenaries' ambush, the sting of Lena Carter's betrayal sharper than the cuts on his face. The shattered flash drive, which held proof of Judge Harlan Prescott's ties to a white supremacist network, lay in pieces back at the mill. Another hope crushed by the judge's relentless machine. Marcus, a U.S. Marshal undercover, was a hunted man, his mission to expose Prescott's corrupt empire teetering on the edge of failure. The burner phone in his pocket, left by the mercenaries, buzzed with a taunting message from Prescott's allies, a reminder that nowhere was safe. Dawn broke, casting pale light through the pines, and Marcus's breath hitched as he heard distant sirens, the law closing in. His ribs ached, his vision swam, but his training kept him moving one step ahead of collapse. He needed shelter, a plan, anything to keep his fight alive. As he staggered onto a dirt road, a rusted pickup truck slowed, its driver, an older black woman with wary eyes, studying him. "You look like trouble," she said, her voice gruff. "Get in." Could this stranger be his salvation, or was Marcus walking into another of Prescott's traps? The woman, who called herself Ruth, drove in silence, her hands steady on the wheel, her gaze flicking to Marcus's bloodied clothes. She took him to a safe house in Atlanta's outskirts, a nondescript warehouse hidden behind a junkyard, its walls lined with crates and flickering monitors. Inside, a group of black activists calling themselves the Shadow Collective greeted Marcus with cautious nods. Ruth, their leader, had seen his viral video from Ironclad, the one exposing the guards' brutality, and recognized him as the man taking on Prescott. "You're either brave or crazy," she said, tossing him a first aid kit. "Prescott's got half the city in his pocket." Marcus, bandaging his cuts, met her gaze. "He's not invincible. I just need proof." The Collective, a mix of coders, ex-cons, and organizers, had been tracking Prescott for years, their files a treasure trove of leads. One activist, a hacker named Kishon, pulled up a laptop, his fingers flying as he revealed hacked financial records linking Prescott to a supremacist group called the Iron Covenant. The records showed millions funneled through shell companies, funding Prescott's rigged trials and private prisons. Marcus's pulse raced, the documents a lifeline to revive his mission. Could these files finally bring Prescott down? The Collective agreed to help, their safe house buzzing with urgency as they planned to leak the records to a national news outlet. Marcus, his strength returning, worked with Kishon to verify the data, cross-referencing transactions with Prescott's court rulings. The evidence was airtight, each dollar tied to a black man's conviction, a ledger of stolen lives. Marcus envisioned the leak hitting the airwaves, the public's outrage forcing Prescott's arrest, his empire crumbling under the weight of truth. By midnight, Kishon encrypted the files, ready to send, and Marcus felt a surge of triumph, believing he'd found the weapon to end the judge's reign. The Collective gathered, their faces lit with hope, and Ruth clasped Marcus's shoulder. "This is our shot," she said, "for all of us." The leak was set for dawn, a coordinated drop to bypass Prescott's media allies. Marcus lay on a cot, his body screaming for rest, but his mind raced with possibilities. He'd been betrayed, beaten, and hunted, but now, with the Collective's backing, he was poised to strike back. Was this the moment he'd been fighting for, the chance to turn the hunter into the prey? But Prescott's machine never slept. At 3 a.m, the safe house's alarms blared, red lights flashing as security cameras showed SWAT teams surrounding the warehouse, their rifles glinting in the dark. Prescott, tipped off by a mole within the Collective, had moved with ruthless precision, framing the group as a terrorist cell plotting to destabilize Atlanta. The hacked records, Marcus's golden ticket, were still on Kishon's laptop, but the SWAT commander, a Prescott loyalist, barked orders to seize all electronics. Marcus grabbed the laptop, shoving it into a hidden compartment, but the team breached the doors, tear gas flooding the room. Ruth rallied the Collective, their makeshift weapons no match for armored cops. Marcus, coughing through the gas, fought. His way to a back exit, his heart pounding as he heard Kishorn scream, tackled by a SWAT officer. The records were safe, but the collective was crumbling, members cuffed and dragged away, their safe house reduced to a war zone. Marcus slipped into the junkyard, his breath ragged, the laptop's weight a reminder of his fleeting victory. Prescott's raid had obliterated his new allies, the news already spinning the terrorist bust to bury the truth. Marcus crouched behind a rusted car, the sirens fading as the SWAT vans left, the collective's dream shattered. Ruth, Kishorn, and the others faced years in prison, their fight snuffed out by Prescott's lies. The laptop, still in Marcus's hands, held the records, but leaking them now was riskier than ever, with Prescott's eyes everywhere. The judge had turned Marcus's hope into ash, his counterattack swift and devastating, proving his grip on Atlanta was ironclad. Marcus's mission, his vow to expose the Iron Covenant, hung by a thread, his body battered, his allies gone. He was a fugitive again, the safe house's ruins a testament to Prescott's power. But Marcus's resolve burned, his Marshal training a fire that refused to die. He'd find a way to use the records to strike when Prescott least expected. Comment 1 if you're outraged by Prescott's betrayal of justice. Hit like if you're cheering for Marcus to rise again. And subscribe to see how this fight unfolds. With the collective gone and the records in his hands, can Marcus outrun Prescott's machine, or will the judge's next move be his last? Marcus Tate crouched in the shadows of Atlanta's underbelly, the laptop clutched tight, its hacked financial records the last shred of hope against Judge Harlan Prescott's empire. The SWAT raid on the Shadow Collective's safe house had left him a fugitive, the activists he'd allied with now branded terrorists, their voices silenced by Prescott's lies. His body ached from the mercenaries' ambush, his heart heavy with the collective's loss. But Marcus, a U.S. Marshal undercover, refused to break. The city pulsed with danger, Prescott's influence in every cop's badge, every news ticker painting Marcus as a violent radical. The records linking Prescott to the Iron Covenant's white supremacist network were his only weapon, but leaking them required a bold move, one that could either topple the judge or bury Marcus for good. He needed a stage, a moment to seize, the public's attention, and he knew exactly where to find it. Prescott's Gala, a glitzy event for Atlanta's elite, where the judge would bask in his untouchable power. Could Marcus infiltrate the lion's den and turn Prescott's triumph into his downfall? Slipping through back alleys, Marcus used his Marshal contacts, a dwindling network of loyalists, to secure a forged invite and a waiter's uniform. The gala was held at the Grand Meridian, a towering hotel with chandeliers and marble floors, its ballroom packed with politicians, CEOs, and Prescott's allies, all sipping champagne while black communities suffered under the judge's gavel. Marcus moved through the crowd, tray in hand, his face obscured by a cap, his heart pounding as he spotted Prescott at the podium, his silver hair gleaming under stage lights. The judge's speech dripped with hypocrisy, praising law and order, while his network profited from rigged trials. Marcus's fingers brushed the tiny camera in his pocket, a Marshal-issued device no bigger than a button, capable of live streaming to a secure feed. He planted it on a balcony overlooking the stage, its lens trained on Prescott, and activated the feed, routing it to a hacker friend outside Atlanta, one of the collective's last free members. The plan was simple: capture Prescott's true face, the one he hid from the public, and leak it to the world. As Prescott toasted the crowd, Marcus whispered into a hidden earpiece, "Go live." The camera hummed, and Marcus felt a surge of adrenaline, believing this was his moment to strike. Prescott, mid-speech, grew bolder, his voice dropping as he leaned toward a group of cronies, unaware of the camera. "These radicals, like Tate, think they can scare us," he said, his tone smug. "But we've been framing troublemakers for years, keeps the streets clean." The crowd chuckled and Prescott's mask slipped, his words a confession of his corrupt empire. Marcus, watching, from the shadows, clenched his fists, the feed capturing every damning syllable. Within minutes, the hacker uploaded the clip to social media, bypassing Prescott's media allies, and the internet erupted. Hashtags like Canto Prescott Exposed trended, news outlets picked up the story, and protests reignited outside the Grand Meridian, chants echoing through the night. Marcus slipped toward an exit, his pulse racing, believing he'd landed a fatal blow. The public was awake, Prescott's own words betraying him, and Marcus's mission felt alive again. He'd turned the gala into a trap, exposing the judges. Rot to millions. Was this the crack that would bring Prescott's empire down? But Prescott was a predator, not prey. As the clip spread, he retreated to a private suite, his face calm, his mind already spinning a counterattack. He'd faced scandals before, and his allies, from media moguls to tech firms, were ready to act. By morning, Prescott's team released a statement, claiming the video was a deepfake, a malicious fabrication by radical extremists like Marcus Tate. They flooded the internet with doctored analyses, experts swearing the audio was manipulated, and loyal news anchors ran the story hard, sowing doubt. Prescott doubled down, addressing the press outside the hotel, his voice somber. "This is an attack on our justice system," he said, eyes glinting with false sincerity. "Tate and his ilk will face consequences." Behind closed doors, he met with his Iron Covenant backers, their wealth and power a shield. They issued a bounty on Marcus, $50,000 dead or alive, spreading the word through police channels and vigilante networks. Atlanta's streets became a hunting ground, cops and bounty hunters scouring every corner, Marcus's face plastered. Unwanted posters labeled a cop killer and terrorist. The protests faltered, public opinion splitting as Prescott's narrative took hold, his deepfake defense drowning the truth. Marcus, hiding in a boarded-up motel, caught the news on a grainy TV, his stomach twisting as Prescott's face filled. The screen spinning lies with chilling ease. The bounty made every shadow a threat, every stranger a potential hunter. The laptop's records, still unshared, were useless without a trusted outlet, and his hacker contact had gone dark, likely caught or scared off. Prescott had turned Marcus's victory into a manhunt, his power suffocating the gala's impact. The city, once a battleground for justice, was now a trap, its streets crawling with enemies. Marcus's mission, his vow to expose the Iron Covenant, felt like a fading echo, his body battered, his options dwindling. He'd struck at Prescott's heart only for the judge to strike back harder, turning Marcus into public enemy number one. But surrender wasn't in his blood. He'd find a way to use the records, to hit Prescott where it hurt, even if it meant risking everything. What could he do now, with the city against him and Prescott's bounty tightening the noose? Marcus Tate crouched in the attic of a crumbling row house in Atlanta's poorest black neighborhood. The laptop, with Judge Harlan Prescott's damning financial records, tucked beneath a loose floorboard, its weight a constant reminder of his dwindling chances. The city was a war zone, with Prescott's $50,000 bounty turning every cop, bounty hunter, and opportunistic thug into a predator hunting Marcus, now branded a terrorist after his gala video was dismissed as a deepfake. His body bore the scars of the mercenaries' ambush, his spirit battered by the Shadow Collective's fall. But Marcus, a U.S. Marshal undercover, clung to his mission to expose Prescott's Iron Covenant network. The neighborhood, a maze of sagging porches and defiant murals, was his last refuge, its residents shielding him with whispered warnings and hidden meals, their own lives scarred by Prescott's corrupt courts. Sirens wailed nearby, and Marcus's breath caught, his eyes scanning the street through a cracked window. He needed a new plan, a way to turn the records into a weapon, but time was bleeding out. Could this community, beaten down by the system, be his lifeline? Or was he endangering them all? The row house belonged to Miss Ella, a 60-year-old grandmother who'd lost her son to Prescott's rigged trials, her eyes sharp with grief and resolve. She'd taken Marcus in after spotting him dodging a police sweep, her home a hub for quiet resistance. "You're not the first to fight," she told him, passing a plate of cornbread. "But you're still breathing, so keep going." Marcus nodded, grateful but wary, knowing his presence put her at risk. Over days he met others, neighbors who slipped him clothes, bandages, and news. Among them was Dion, a former court clerk, who'd worked under Prescott, fired for questioning irregular case files. Dayon, lean and jittery, had kept copies of documents, memos showing Prescott's orders to fast-track black defendants to prison. "I was scared," Dion admitted, handing Marcus a USB drive. "But you're out here risking it all." The memos, paired with the laptop's records, were dynamite, enough to prove Prescott's corruption beyond a deepfake defense. Marcus's pulse quickened, hope flickering as he and Dion planned to go public, contacting a rogue journalist willing to run the story. Could this unlikely ally be the key to breaking Prescott's grip? They worked in secret, Marcus using his Marshal training to secure a burner phone and encrypt their communications, while Dayon drafted a press release, their plan to drop the evidence at a community rally the next night. The neighborhood rallied behind them, organizing the event under the guise of a vigil for Prescott's victims, flyers spreading word through back channels. Marcus felt the tide turning, the community's defiance fueling his own. The rally, set in a vacant lot ringed by murals, drew hundreds, their candles flickering as speakers shared stories of lost sons and brothers. Marcus, hidden in the crowd, watched Dayon take the stage, the USB drive in his pocket, ready to hand off to the journalist. The air crackled with hope, and Marcus believed they'd done it, that the truth would finally break through. The crowd chanted, "No more cages," and Marcus's chest swelled, thinking he'd turned a hunted man's fight into a movement. Was this the moment Prescott's empire would crack, the people's voice too loud to silence? But Prescott's machine struck with surgical cruelty. As Dayon raised the USB drive, a roar split the night, and flames erupted at the lot's edge, Molotov cocktails raining down from masked figures in black. The crowd screamed, scattering as fire devoured tents and banners, the vigil turning into chaos. Prescott's allies, tipped off by a traitor in the community, had orchestrated a firebombing, their goal to silence the rally and bury Marcus's evidence. Dayon, caught in the inferno, stumbled, the USB drive slipping from his hand as a masked figure tackled him, his cries lost in the smoke. Marcus lunged to help, but a blast of heat drove him back, his eyes stinging as he saw Dayon's body slump, the drive crushed under a boot. The attackers vanished, and police swarmed, not to help but to arrest, their batons cracking skulls, their radios buzzing with Prescott's orders. By morning, the news spun the fire as Marcus's doing, a terrorist act to destabilize Atlanta, his face plastered across screens as the arsonist. The neighborhood burned, homes gutted, families displaced, and Marcus, fleeing through alleys, carried the laptop, now his only proof, his heart heavy with guilt. Dion was dead, the rally destroyed, and Prescott had turned a community's hope into ashes. Marcus hid in a storm drain, the laptop's cold metal against his chest, the city's pulse a distant throb. The firebombing wasn't just an attack, it was a message, Prescott flexing his power to crush defiance, to paint Marcus as a monster. The community that had sheltered him was paying the price, their homes and lives collateral damage in the judge's war. Marcus's mission, to expose. The Iron Covenant felt like a curse, each step forward met with devastation. He'd thought the rally would be his triumph, but Prescott had outplayed him. His counterattack a brutal reminder of his reach. Marcus's body screamed for rest, his mind for a plan, but the city was a noose, tightening with every hour. He needed a new move, a way to strike Prescott where he was vulnerable, but the cost was climbing and the judge's next blow would be worse. What could Marcus do now, with the city burning and his name a curse? Comment 1 if you're sick of Prescott's ruthless games, hit like if you're rooting for Marcus to fight back, and subscribe to see how this battle unfolds. Can Marcus find a way to use the laptop's records, or will Prescott's next trap be his last? Marcus Tate slunk through the shadows of Atlanta's affluent suburbs, the laptop with Judge Harlan Prescott's financial records pressed against his chest, its data the last spark of his mission to dismantle the judge's white supremacist empire. The firebombing of the rally had left the city's poorest black neighborhood in ruins, Dayon's death a fresh wound, and Marcus, branded an arsonist and terrorist, was a ghost in a city that wanted him dead. Prescott's $50,000 bounty had turned every corner into a trap, cops and vigilantes scouring the streets, his face a grim warning on every newsstand. But Marcus, a U.S. Marshal undercover, was fueled by a rage that burned hotter than fear. The community's sacrifice, their homes reduced to ash, demanded he fight on. Prescott's mansion, a sprawling fortress of wealth and secrets, was his target, its private server rumored to hold the Iron Covenant's full ledger. If Marcus could hack it, he'd have undeniable proof to bury the judge. The night was thick with risk, but he moved with purpose, his training a lifeline. Could he breach Prescott's inner sanctum, or was he walking into a noose? The mansion loomed behind iron gates, its marble facade glowing under floodlights, a monument to Prescott's untouchable power. Marcus, clad in a stolen maintenance uniform, slipped past security cameras, his martial skills guiding his steps through blind spots he'd memorized from blueprints smuggled by a disgruntled ex-guard. The grounds buzzed with guards, their radios crackling, but Marcus was a shadow, scaling a drainage pipe to a second-floor window. Inside, the air was heavy with the scent of leather and cigar smoke, the halls lined with portraits of Prescott's ancestors, their eyes cold and judgmental. Marcus found the server room, a steel door hidden behind a bookcase, its lock no match for his lockpick. The server hummed, a digital vault of Prescott's sins, and Marcus plugged in a decryption device, a black market tool from his Marshal. Contacts. His fingers flew, sweat beading on his brow as the device cracked the firewall, pulling up files that detailed the Iron Covenant's operations, names, dates, and millions in transfers to rig trials, fund militias, and silence dissent. Marcus's heart raced, the data a guillotine for Prescott's empire. Could this be the evidence to end the judge's reign? With the files downloading, Marcus sent a compressed copy to a rogue news outlet, the Free Beacon, known for defying corporate censorship. The outlet's editor, a grizzled journalist named Carla Ruiz, had agreed to run the story, her team ready to blast the files across every platform. As the transfer completed, Marcus felt a surge of triumph, believing he'd finally outmaneuvered Prescott. The Beacon's story would hit at dawn, the records proving the judge's ties to the Iron Covenant, reigniting the public's fury and forcing accountability. Marcus unplugged the device, slipping it into his pocket, and prepared to exfiltrate. His steps light despite the mansion's oppressive silence. He'd struck at Prescott's heart, turning the judge's own secrets against him. For the first time since the rally's flames, Marcus saw a path to victory, a chance to honor Dion, the collective, and every life Prescott had crushed. The server room's glow faded as he moved toward the window, ready to vanish into the night. Was this the blow that would topple Prescott's throne? But Prescott was always one step ahead. The judge, paranoid and cunning, had rigged the server with a silent alarm, its signal alerting his private security and Iron Covenant allies the moment Marcus breached it. As Marcus reached the window, floodlights snapped on, bathing the grounds in blinding white, and a dozen armed guards swarmed, their rifles trained on every exit. Prescott's voice crackled through a loudspeaker, chillingly calm. "You're predictable, Tate. Did you think I'd leave my secrets unguarded?" Marcus's stomach dropped, his escape route cut off, the mansion a trap he'd walked into. Blind? Worse, Prescott had anticipated the leak, planting fake files in the server, doctored records that painted the Iron Covenant as a charity, not a supremacist network. The Free Beacon, unaware, would publish the fakes, discrediting itself as fake news and burying Marcus's truth under a wave of ridicule. Prescott's guards breached the room, but the judge's voice grew sharper, revealing his endgame. "We're live, Tate. Smile for the cameras." A drone hovered outside, streaming to a curated audience of Prescott's allies, framing Marcus as a terrorist caught red-handed. The judge's plan was clear: shoot Marcus on air, label him a threat, and end his fight forever. Marcus dove behind a server rack, his heart pounding as bullets sparked around him, his mind racing for a way out. The laptop, still in his bag, held the real records, but the fake files were already spreading, Prescott's trap closing like a vice. The mansion, once his target, was now a kill box, every door and window a death sentence. Marcus's mission, his vow to expose the Iron Covenant, teetered on the edge, his every move countered by Prescott's ruthless foresight. He'd thought he'd struck a fatal blow, But the judge had turned his infiltration into a spectacle, a public execution to cement his power. Marcus's training was all he had left, his will a flickering flame against the judge's machine. He needed a miracle, a way to flip this trap. But the guards were closing in, their boots echoing like a countdown. What could he do now, with the world watching and Prescott's finger on the trigger? Marcus Tate crouched behind a humming server rack in Judge Harlan Prescott's mansion, the air thick with the acrid tang of gunpowder, his heart pounding as bullets chipped the walls around him. The laptop with the real Iron Covenant records was strapped to his chest, a lifeline now buried under Prescott's trap, a live-streamed arrest meant to paint Marcus as a terrorist and justify his execution. The judge's voice echoed through the mansion's speakers, taunting, "You're finished, Tate," as guards in tactical gear closed in, their rifles glinting under the server room's fluorescent glow. Marcus, a U.S. Marshal undercover, had infiltrated Prescott's sanctum to hack his server, believing he'd struck a fatal blow, only to find himself outplayed. The fake files he'd sent to the Free Beacon were spreading, discrediting his truth, and the drone outside broadcast his every move to Prescott's allies, framing him as a threat to be gunned down. His body ached from weeks of beatings, his mission to expose Prescott's white supremacist network hanging by a thread. But Marcus's training was a steel core, his will unyielding. Could he turn this death trap into a chance to fight back, or was this the end of his war? The guards advanced, their boots thudding, and Marcus's eyes darted to the server room's layout, his martial instincts mapping an escape. He grabbed a fire extinguisher from the wall, yanking the pin and spraying a cloud of white foam, blinding the nearest guard. The man cursed, firing wildly, and Marcus tackled him, wrenching the rifle free and slamming its butt into the guard's jaw. The others hesitated, caught off guard, and Marcus used the moment, sprinting through the foam, his shoulder crashing through a side door into a maintenance hall. Alarms blared, the drone's feed flickering as he ducked into shadows, but Prescott's voice roared, "Seal the exits!" Marcus's breath burned, his ribs screaming, but he moved like a ghost, slipping past a patrol and finding a stairwell to the mansion's roof. The live stream meant to damn him was his weapon now. Millions were watching, and he could expose Prescott's lie if he survived. He reached the roof, the Atlanta skyline glittering below, and spotted the drone, its red eye tracking him. Could he hijack the feed to turn the tables? Marcus smashed the rifle stock into the drone, snatching it as it sputtered, and used his decryption device to hack its signal, a trick from his covert ops days. His fingers shook, sweat stinging his eyes, but the device synced, redirecting the feed to a public platform, bypassing Prescott's control. The stream now showed Marcus, bloodied but defiant, holding the laptop. "This is the truth," he rasped into the drone's mic, his voice raw. "Prescott's framing me to hide his crimes. These records prove he's rigging trials, funding. Hate. Don't let him win." He uploaded a snippet of the real files, enough to spark doubt, and the internet exploded. Hashtags like Harger Tate Speaks trending as viewers shared the clip. Marcus tossed the drone, its feed still live, and slid down a drainpipe, landing in the mansion's gardens as guards swarmed the roof. He sprinted into the city, the laptop secure, believing he'd flipped Prescott's trap. The public was rallying. Social media posts demanding answers, and protests erupted outside the courthouse, chants of "Free Tate" echoing through the streets. Marcus, hiding in an alley, felt a surge of hope, thinking he'd turned the hunter into the hunted. Was this his chance to finally break Prescott's grip? But Prescott's machine was a hydra, its heads regrowing with every strike. The judge, watching the chaos from his office, slammed his fist on his desk, his face a mask of cold fury. Marcus's rooftop broadcast was a problem, but Prescott had allies in higher places. He called a contact in the FBI, a loyalist who owed him favors, and within hours a new narrative emerged. The Bureau labeled Marcus a domestic terrorist, citing his armed infiltration of the mansion and incitement of riots, issuing a shoot-on-sight order to every law enforcement agency in Georgia. News channels fed by Prescott's media cronies ran the story relentlessly, showing Marcus's face alongside warnings of imminent danger. The protests outside the courthouse were met with tear gas and batons, riot police dispersing the crowds, their signs trampled in the chaos. Marcus's broadcast, meant to rally support, was twisted into proof of his violence, and the public's hope fractured, some now fearing him as the terrorist Prescott painted. By nightfall, Marcus was cornered in an abandoned warehouse near the Chattahoochee River, its rusted beams creaking under the weight of his despair, helicopters circling above, their searchlights slicing the dark. Marcus huddled behind a crate, the laptop's glow his only companion, the sounds of boots and radios closing in. The FBI's order made every cop a potential executioner, and Prescott's allies had ensured no one would question his death. His rooftop stand had ignited a spark, but the judge's counterattack was a tidal wave drowning the truth in fear. The laptop's records, unshared in full, were his last card, but uploading them now risked interception by Prescott's tech allies. Marcus's mission, his vow to honor Dion and the collective, felt like a fading dream, each victory met with a harsher blow. He'd fought his way out of the mansion, rallied the people, only for Prescott to tighten the noose. The warehouse's walls seemed to close in, the helicopters roar a countdown to his end. But Marcus was a marshal, trained to defy the odds, and surrender wasn't an option. He needed a final play, a way to turn this manhunt into Prescott's undoing, even if it cost him everything. What could he do now with the city a prison and the judge's machine poised to crush him? Marcus Tate huddled in the shadows of an abandoned warehouse by the Chattahoochee River, the laptop with Judge Harlan Prescott's Iron Covenant records pressed against his chest, its faint heat a reminder of his fraying mission. The FBI's shoot-on-sight order, orchestrated by Prescott's allies, had turned Atlanta into a kill zone, helicopters chopping the night sky, their searchlights slashing through the warehouse's broken windows. Marcus, a U.S. Marshal undercover, was a ghost in a city that branded him a terrorist, his rooftop broadcast from Prescott's mansion twisted into proof of his danger. The protests it sparked were crushed, tear gas and batons scattering his supporters, and the laptop's files, his last hope to expose Prescott's white supremacist network, were useless without a safe channel. His body was a map of pain, each bruise a testament to weeks of survival. But his will burned, fueled by the memory of Dion, the collective, and the neighborhood reduced to ash. The warehouse's rusted beams creaked, boots echoed outside, and Marcus knew time was bleeding out. Could he turn this final stand into a strike against Prescott, or was this the end of his fight? Marcus's eyes darted to the laptop, its battery. Lo, and he remembered a Marshal trick, hacking police radios to broadcast a signal. He pried open a hidden panel on his decryption device, its wires a lifeline, and patched into the city's law enforcement frequency, his fingers trembling but precise. The files contained audio, Prescott's recorded confessions from the mansion. Server, boasting of rigging trials and funding hate. If Marcus could broadcast them, every cop, dispatcher, and citizen with a scanner would hear the judge's voice, undeniable proof no deepfake could bury. He uploaded the audio, his breath shallow, and hit transmit, the signal hijacking radios across Atlanta. Prescott's voice crackled through the airwaves, cold and smug. "We've been cleaning the streets for years, locking up the right kind of troublemakers." Marcus leaned back, the warehouse's chill seeping into his bones, as the audio looped, spreading to social media as citizens recorded and shared it. Hashtags like Prescott Confessed exploded, news outlets scrambled, and protests reignited, crowds swarming the courthouse, their chants a roar against the night. Marcus's heart raced, believing he'd landed a killing blow, the truth too loud for Prescott to silence. Had he finally broken the judge's machine? The broadcast's impact was immediate, social media a wildfire of outrage, with millions demanding Prescott's arrest. Marcus, still in the warehouse, heard the helicopters shift, their patterns less certain as officers on the ground hesitated, the audio sowing doubt. He'd turned Prescott's own words into a weapon, rallying the public and fracturing the judge's grip on law enforcement. For a moment, Marcus felt the tide turn, his mission to honor the fallen alive again. He clutched the laptop, ready to slip into the city and find a new hideout, believing he'd bought time to leak the full records. But Prescott was a predator. his desperation of venom that struck without mercy. The judge holed up in his office. His face pale as he heard his own voice on the radio, didn't flinch. He'd built his empire on control, and Marcus's broadcast was a wound, not a death blow. He made a call, his voice low, to a loyalist in the Iron Covenant, a man with no name but endless resources. "End this," Prescott said. By dawn, the plan was in motion, a strike so personal it would break Marcus's spirit. Prescott's operatives tracked Marcus's sister, Aisha, a 32-year-old nurse who'd raised him after their parents died, her life untouched by his undercover world until now. They kidnapped her from her apartment, a silent snatch in the night, and sent Marcus a video via the burner phone he'd kept since the mill ambush. The footage showed Aisha, bound and gagged, her eyes wide with fear, a masked man holding a knife to her throat. A text followed. "Surrender by noon or she dies. City Square. No tricks." Marcus's blood ran cold, the warehouse's walls blurring as the video looped in his mind. Prescott had found his heart, the one thing Marcus couldn't lose. The judge's allies spun a new lie, broadcasting that Marcus was holding a hostage, Aisha, in a terrorist standoff, ensuring any move he made would trigger a SWAT team's bullets. The noon deadline loomed, and Marcus faced an impossible choice: give himself up, likely dying in a staged shootout, or fight on, risking Aisha's life. The laptop's files, his last weapon, were useless if he couldn't save her. Prescott had turned Marcus's triumph into a nightmare, his counterattack a blade to the soul. Marcus sat, the laptop's glow fading, the helicopter's roar, a relentless pulse. The broadcast had shaken Prescott's empire, but the judge's move was a checkmate, using Aisha to force Marcus into the open. His mission, to expose the Iron Covenant and honor the fallen, felt hollow against his sister's life. The warehouse was a cage, the city a trap, and Prescott's machine seemed unbreakable, each victory met with a crueler blow. Marcus's training screamed to fight, but his heart begged to save Aisha, the woman who'd taught him to survive. He needed a plan, a way to flip this trap, but the clock was ticking, and Prescott's operatives were waiting, their rifles ready for a public execution. What could Marcus do now with his sister's life on the line and the judge's machine poised to crush him? Marcus Tate stood in the heart of Atlanta's city square, the noon sun blazing down, his hands raised, the laptop with Judge Harlan Prescott's Iron Covenant record strapped to his chest, its weight a final anchor to his unraveling mission. The square was a fortress of SWAT teams, their rifles trained on him, news helicopters buzzing overhead, broadcasting what Prescott's allies called a terrorist surrender. Aisha, Marcus's sister, was somewhere in Prescott's grip, her life the bait to draw him out. The judge's video of her bound and terrified burned into Marcus's mind. The broadcast of Prescott's confessions, hijacked through police radios, had sparked nationwide outrage, but the judge's kidnapping of Aisha turned Marcus's triumph into a trap, framing him as a hostage-taker to justify a public execution. Marcus, a U.S. Marshal undercover, had fought through prisons, ambushes, and betrayals to expose Prescott's white supremacist network. But now, with Aisha's life on the line, he faced an impossible choice. The crowd, a mix of protesters and onlookers, watched in tense silence, their phones recording every move. Could Marcus save Aisha and expose Prescott, or was this the judge's final checkmate? Marcus's eyes scanned the square, his Marshal, training mapping every sniper perch, every SWAT position, his heart pounding but his mind razor-sharp. He'd known surrender was a death sentence, but he'd come prepared. His last card hidden in the tech sewn into his jacket, a microtransmitter capable of live streaming through encrypted channels, a fail-safe from his covert ops days. As the SWAT commander barked, "On your knees, Tate!" Marcus activated the device, its signal piggybacking on the news chopper's feeds, broadcasting to millions. He spoke, his voice steady, cutting through the square's tension. "Prescott's holding my sister, Aisha, to silence me. These records..." He tapped the laptop. "Prove he's rigging trials, funding hate. This isn't a surrender, it's a stand." The stream went viral, screens across the world showing Marcus's face, the laptop, and his words, undermining Prescott's narrative. The crowd stirred, some chanting "Free Aisha" as social media erupted, hashtags like "Target Tate Truth" drowning out the judge's lies. Marcus felt a flicker of hope, believing he'd turned Prescott's spectacle into a stage for truth. Had he outplayed the judge at his own game? The SWAT team hesitated, their radios buzzing with conflicting orders, the live stream sowing chaos. Prescott, watching from a secure office, his face twisted with rage, screamed into a phone, demanding Marcus's death. But the judge's plan was unraveling, the crowd growing bolder, their phones capturing every second. Marcus's broadcast revealed the laptop's files, snippets of Prescott's financial ties to the Iron Covenant flashing across screens, undeniable proof of his corruption. Protesters surged forward, overwhelming police barriers, their voices a roar against injustice. Then, a crack in Prescott's machine. 2 SWAT officers, black men who'd heard the radio confessions, lowered their rifles, their faces grim. One, a veteran named Harris, stepped forward, his voice low. "We heard the truth, Tate. Where's your sister?" Marcus, stunned, pointed to a nearby van, its tinted windows hiding Prescott's operatives. Harris signaled his partner, and they stormed the van, dragging out Aisha, unharmed but shaken, and a masked Covenant enforcer, his knife clattering to the ground. The crowd roared, the stream capturing Aisha's reunion with Marcus, her tears a testament to their bond. Was this the moment Prescott's empire finally crumbled? Prescott's allies scrambled, but the tide had turned. Harris and his partner, defying orders, cuffed the enforcer and escorted Marcus and Aisha to safety, the crowd parting like a sea. The live stream, now seen by tens of millions, forced the FBI to act. Their shoot-on-sight order rescinded as agents arrested Prescott. At his office, his face ashen as cameras flashed. The laptop's files, fully leaked by Marcus's hacker contact, hit every major outlet, exposing the Iron Covenant's network, naming politicians, cops, and moguls who'd backed Prescott's hate. Atlanta's streets filled with protesters, their signs demanding justice, while the nation grappled with the scandal. Marcus, cleared of charges, stood with Aisha in a safe house, her hand gripping his, her trauma a shadow that would linger. The victory was bittersweet, the city's racism still a festering wound, and a cryptic text on Marcus's burner phone from an unknown ally hinted at a larger conspiracy. Prescott was a pawn. Dig deeper. Marcus's mission was far from over, the fight against systemic hate just beginning, but he'd struck a blow that echoed, proving one man could shake an empire. What lay ahead in the shadows of this new mystery? The story of Marcus Tate, a U.S. Marshal undercover battling Judge Harlan Prescott's racist empire, reveals profound truths about resilience and systemic injustice. Marcus's journey through Atlanta's corrupt courts, brutal prisons, and deadly ambushes underscores the relentless grip of racism, where every victory is met with fiercer retaliation. His fight exposes how power manipulates truth, framing the innocent as villains. Yet his refusal to break teaches that courage can ignite change, even against impossible odds. The community's sacrifice, from Dayon's death to Aisha's trauma, shows the collective cost of defiance, but also the strength in unity, as neighbors shielded Marcus despite their own suffering. Prescott's downfall, sparked by Marcus's live-stream truth, proves that one voice, amplified by technology and resolve, can shatter lies, but the cryptic message at the end warns that racism's roots run deeper, demanding ongoing vigilance. This tale challenges us to confront bias in our own systems, to stand with those who fight, and to amplify silenced voices. Marcus's bittersweet victory, tainted by Aisha's pain and lingering corruption, reminds us that justice is a marathon, not a sprint requiring heart, strategy, and sacrifice. Let's honor his stand by questioning authority and uplifting truth. What's a moment you've seen racism challenged, and how can we keep pushing for justice? Comment below, hit like if Marcus's fight inspires you, subscribe for more stories of courage, and share to spread this call for change. Thank you for joining this journey. Here's to a future where truth prevails.